Please welcome to the stage Jaqui Barnes-Monaghan.
Have you ever thought about how many 16 to 24-year-olds there are in the UK? We're a nation of around 66 million. What percentage then are going to be in this age group? It's okay, you don't have to look it up. It's 5,716,686. Just under 6 million 16 to 24-year-olds in this country. But did you know that 49% of those, this is 2.83 million, are classed as economically inactive? Economically inactive is a government term that means they're not in work and they're not seeking work. So it doesn't mean necessarily that they're unemployed. For some, it might mean that employment isn't an option for them for whatever reason. Of this 49%, just over half of them are in education, as you'd probably expect. But 22% of them, of these young people, are what we term as NEET, not in employment, education or training. And this translates to 684,000 young people. That's a population the size of Bristol, which, as you will know, is a significant sized city. So what are they all doing? How are they all getting through life if they're not in work or education or training? What are they doing? Well, many will be supported by parents or possibly social services. Some may have disabilities, physical, sensory, or on a spectrum. And some of those with disabilities will be receiving disability benefits if they're considered disabled enough. Yep, disabled enough is a term used by the benefits system. But many parents are too anxious about the benefits system process to put their children through it. And so many parents are still supporting their children into their 20s. So who's to blame for this situation? Who's to blame for this 684,000 young people who are, not in education, employment or training? Well, that's a really tricky one. We could blame successive governments, we could blame society. I suspect it's more intricate than those two answers. But the one thing I do know is that these 684,000 young people are not to blame for the situation that they find themselves in. Birth is a lottery, isn't it? We don't choose, we don't have any say. We don't know whether we're going to be born into a rich family, a poor family, a family of addicts, a family of criminals, loving parents, violent parents. We don't choose any of that. It really is a lottery. And yet, these young people find themselves being judged for these things that are not of their doing. Do you remember as a child? Come on, this will be a good one. So, hands up if you had fairy tales told you as a child. Yeah? Well, I'm sure you'll all be pleased to know that children being born even now are hearing the same fairy tales. you know? And what are fairy tales? They're about people who are struggling, usually young people, aren't they? They're usually young and a bit gorgeous, or at least they are in the Disney films. And so you have people like Jack and his mother who were living in poverty, Cinderella who was abused by her stepmother, Pinocchio who could not stay out of trouble, and of course Princess Aurora who had a severe case of narcolepsy. And what happened for them? Well, their dreams came true. They lived happily ever after, thanks to magic beans and fairy godmothers and blue fairies, and don't forget the kisses. It's okay, I'm not going to kiss anyone. You're quite safe. In the words of George Benson, who first sang this song, those of you who are much younger than me, which will be most of you, will remember Whitney Houston and even Michael Jackson singing it. I believe the children are our future. But what sort of future are we giving them when we allow 684,000 to be in this condition? What are we doing about it when there aren't enough resources, support, incentives, and definitely not a clear progression path for them? And that's not just me saying that. That's AVASO, the Commission for Youth Unemployment. I'm Jaqui Barnes-Monaghan, and I'm a queen bee. Yeah, I feel quite good about that. And that's because I've got a hive of fun and learning and busyness. I'm a trainer and a coach, and I've been in supported housing and care, in social care generally, for the last 30 years. And I've learnt a lot during that time. And most of it has been from the people that I've worked with, the people that have needed my support. And I can't help thinking that if we learnt to do a little more listening, that we'd all learn a whole lot more. So I specialise in training, coaching and supported employment. And I'm going to borrow a bit here from Martin Luther King, big hero of mine. I also have a dream, and it's so similar to his. Because in my dream, young people go into positive environments where they're told how fabulous they are, where they're encouraged and treated only with respect, where nobody says negative things to them, and negative things are not used as a weapon against them. They're not judged by their family's financial situation, what size house they live in, whereabouts in the town they live. They're certainly not judged on the colour of their skin or their sexuality. That's my dream. That's my dream. A dream where young people are given the resources, the incentives, and the progression path that they need, as well as time. Time to explore, time for us to listen to what they really want. You may know of the Equality Act of 2010. The Equality Act was brought about in 2010, and it came from all the other acts of Parliament that covered equality in some way or another. It says that there are 9 protected characteristics. So people who fall under one of these 9 protected characteristics are protected from discrimination under the law. But what are these magnificent 9? Age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion and belief, sex, and finally, sexuality. So in this country then, we've set this down in law, which must mean surely that we know that people get discriminated against under these 9 characteristics, and we think it's wrong. That's why we have a law about it. So let's take the first one. Let's take age. Now, when we think about age discrimination, we tend to think about older people, don't we? We think about people over 50 struggling to get into work or finding themselves top of the list for redundancy. Or it might be somebody over 60 maybe, and for some reason they've not received their private pension because a little loophole has occurred. Whatever it is, we always tend to think of older people. But actually, it affects young people just as much. If in this country you're 16 or 18 and you want to go into work, first of all, you'll be paid a very poor wage. But secondly, what sort of work can you have where you don't have experience? And this is a problem because many employers are using agencies, recruitment agencies, to get their staff. And so often the adverts say, must have 2 years experience. How can you have that when you've just walked out of school yesterday, or college or university, whichever it is? So that already puts them on the back foot. Well, they could do apprenticeships, people say. Well, yeah, they could. They could apply for apprenticeships. But there's no guaranteed job at the end of an apprenticeship. And apprenticeships come in various grades. So you might do level 1, but that won't actually get you a job, because you've then got to find another apprenticeship that's at level 2, and in some cases 3 and 4. And so we end up with some young people having done 3 or 4 apprenticeships in a wide range of subjects. So you might have somebody who's done level 2 retail, level 1 bricklaying. They don't really go together. But what happens is that young people start to feel, well, I'll just have to take whatever I can get. Which, you know, is understandable. People of my generation, I know, we've certainly done all kinds of jobs just because we needed to have a job. It might not necessarily have been what we wanted to do, and short term, that's fine. But you know what? Did anyone ask them what their dreams were? Did anyone say to them, what do you dream about doing for the rest of your life? I don't know. Maybe they did. If you grow up a child in care, or you have a disability, or maybe you're abused, or maybe you didn't cope with school very well, maybe you were bullied, then really equality is not part of your life experience. And this is what I dream of seeing changing. I can't do that by myself, obviously, but that's my hope for the future. Another area of equality or inequality for young people is economic disadvantages. If a child in year 11 is receiving free school meals, do you know that they are 50% more likely to end up neat. That's really shocking, isn't it? Does that still shock you? I hope so, because it should. It really, really should. Now, did you know that 36% of those who are registered as neat are also registered as children in need? 36%. And 15% of them are looked after children. That means they're in care, or that they've lived away from their parents' home where they've been housed by social services for more than 24 hours. So, 36, 15, it's not hard to do the math, is it? 51% of those who are neat are definitely disadvantaged in some way or another. And is that their fault? Of course it's not. Of course it's not. For myself, I had a relatively idyllic childhood. My dad was in the army. My mum was a stay-at-home mum who looked after me and my 5 siblings until my first term at secondary school. That year, Dad left the army, and him and Mum moved the family from the centre of London to Swindon in the West Country. Now, what we didn't know was that Swindon had been listed for an overflow from London. That means basically that people were losing their homes in London because of rebuilding and regeneration, and where could they put them to live? Oh, we'll stick some of them in Swindon. Well, this caused a lot of resentment amongst the locals, which we didn't know about, because this was 1970, and this was the beginning of what was a very difficult recession. Factories were starting to close, and Swindon was a very industrial town at that time. So I'd been there about 2 weeks. I'd met a few local kids, made a couple of friends, one of them who's still a friend today. But in week 2 at my new secondary school, I had the great misfortune to meet Margaret and Annette. I don't know why they gravitated to me. I didn't know them. They weren't in any of my classes. But they had obviously heard about me, that I was the new kid who started in the middle of term and had come from London. What this led to was that I would be walking home from school, and if Margaret and Annette spied me and their little group of followers, I'd get beaten up. Not just once, but every evening after school. So I very quickly started working out convoluted routes to get home. Sometimes walking 2 or 3 miles, much further than I had to. I only lived half a mile away, so that I would be safe. Of course, after a while, they got a bit fed up of that and, moved on to fresh meat, as they say. But school didn't suddenly get easier for me. Oh no, just imagine it. I was short. I was the shortest in the year. I probably looked like I should still be at primary, which meant I had to be at the front of the school photos, which was just dreadful. I was a little on the plump side, not massively so. I'm not sure they would have said, I was obese, but, you only had to have a little bit of extra flesh when I was a kid. And I wore glasses, not all the time like I do now, but just for reading and writing, for close work, as many children do. So what else could they do but give me a hard time every day, jokes at my expense, and I can still remember every single name that they called me. You know, they say, do you remember that old rhyme, sticks and stones will break my bones? It's not true, you know. Physical wounds heal, and they'll heal completely in most cases. But those emotional ones, they stay with you for life. So there I was at secondary school, just grateful that I didn't get acne. Because if I'd have got acne, life just wouldn't have been worth living. I'd have probably had to just stay in bed all the time. But I didn't, because thankfully my mother had great genes when it came to skin, and she passed them on to her daughters. Yay! A highlight in my life. Anyway, moving on. When I was 15, I went to bed one evening, and it was my habit to read in bed. Mum and Dad encouraged all of us to be readers, and we were. So I read some of what, I don't know what book I was reading. And then I settled down, pulled the blankets up. That shows my age, doesn't it? Blankets. Pulled the blankets up to my neck. And as I closed my eyes, had this dreadful fear that gripped me and turned me cold, that if I fell asleep, I would surely die. It was terrifying. It was terrifying. All I could do was scream for my mother. Mum came up and she quieted me down and stroked my hair until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. This continued for quite some time. So I would try not to go to sleep, and therefore then I couldn't get up in the morning. I was tired at school. This added to all of these problems, of course. But this lasted for some time. My mother, an amazing woman, didn't allow the doctor to give me Valium, for which I'm eternally grateful. But she sat there night after night after night, just stroking my hair until my body just made me fall asleep. During all this, I was doing okay at school, amazingly. I was in the top group at school for all my subjects. I was doing okay. I didn't like all of the subjects. I wasn't very good at handing in homework. And quite often it would have been done on the bus, so it'd be very scrawly and with the occasional line that went down the page where we'd had an emergency stop or something. I'm sure many of you can remember those days. But I did pass my mock O-levels. Different time, we did O-levels then. And all I wanted to do was then pass my O-levels, go to college, do A-levels, go to a university, live an amazing Bohemian life, like I'd seen in lots of movies. Yeah? If you've seen movies from the 60s and early 70s, you'll know what I mean. However, the day came when I was expelled. Expelled, you say? Good grief, surely an upstanding young woman like yourself. I know, it is hard to believe, isn't it? So what had I done that would cause the school to expel me? What kind of heinous crime had I committed? Had I punched a teacher? Tempted, but no, I'd never committed a violent act. Maybe I burnt the school down. Again, very tempting at times. I'm sure we've all been tempted, haven't we? But no, arson, definitely not my thing. No, I'd done something much, much worse than any of these things. I got pregnant. Dun, 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 dun. You needed to roll the drums there. Now, this was 1975, and my school had only stopped being a grammar school the year before. So this wasn't good. So I was told by 2 female teachers that I had ruined my life, that I would never amount to anything, I'd never succeed at anything, and all I could hope was that some man would come along and marry me. In the mid-70s, even then that seemed archaic. But there you go. So I was expelled and put into the shame corner. And that was really quite hard. The neighbours made life quite difficult for various members of my family. They, stuck their noses up at my mum and dad and stopped saying hello, all those sort of things. And so because of that, I asked to go to a mother and baby home because I thought, take the pressure off the family, it's not their fault, I'll go and do that. I was quite an independent teenager. So I went to a mother and baby home in Salisbury, which was a real experience, where we were treated like naughty girls, as if we'd done something that was so naughty that it would stain us for the rest of our lives. We were actively encouraged to give our babies up, and many of the girls I was there with did just that. Some of them had been told by their parents never to return to the family home unless they gave their baby up. Not me. My parents were amazing. And they said whatever I decided, they would support me in. I kept my baby. A hard decision, but one I've never regretted, not for 1 second. So there I was, going home with my baby, and, like any new mother, really proud of her. And that's when I discovered that it wasn't only kids who bullied kids. And I'd be walking to a friend's house maybe, or maybe to the shops, and see a group of adults ahead of me, and I'd be walking towards them proudly with my baby in the pram. Great big pram, being the 70s. And they say, oh, can we look at your baby? And I'd be like, oh, yes. And they're going to tell me how lovely my baby is, how beautiful she is, and everything. And they'd say, not bad for a bastard. And then they'd walk away laughing, shouting whore back at me. People can be quite difficult at times, can't they? As a young person, all of this stuff affected the rest of my life. The rest of my life. So, for years, I did entry-level jobs after entry-level jobs, always thinking that was all I would ever be able to do, because people like me don't amount to anything. We're not successful. We don't deserve to succeed because we're so bad. We did something so terrible. We were bullied at school, told we were ugly and unlikable, and we just wanted a boy to like us. And when your sex education is delivered by an embarrassed geography teacher who is practically leaving the classroom before he's even started, you can't really be blamed for your naivety and lack of knowledge, can you? So, life sort of continued the way life does. It just sort of happens sometimes. From 75 until 1999. And if I did an inventory of those intervening years, it would look something like this. Children, 2. Postnatal depression, 2. Marriages, 2. Seeing the pattern here? Divorces? 1. No, 2nd was already on the way. Fooled you though, didn't I? Career? None. Jobs? Many, many, many. Times treated for depression and anxiety? Far too many to remember. Oh, and I forgot. Mental breakdown, 1. And then life stopped happening and started working out for me. I was 40 by now, still doing entry-level jobs. I was working in social care. I'd done a few years in the NHS as a care assistant. Now I was working as a support worker in a supported housing scheme for younger adults with physical disabilities, and I loved it. I'd done loads and loads of jobs. I'd cleaned the toilets for mechanics in a garage. I don't even want to tell you what that was like, but I've done that. I sold sexy underwear by party plan. I'd worked in an 8 till late shop. I'd been a cleaner. I'd done all kinds of jobs. I was a bookie at one point. But when I moved into social care, by the end of the first day, I knew that I fitted. This was where I belonged. I felt like I'd come home. It was brilliant. So here am I, loving this job as a support worker, and we get a new manager. Now this new manager, her name was Carmen. Sounds quite exotic, doesn't it? Carmen. She was tall, statuesque, with stunning features, and I don't mean in a traditional, pretty way, but just you could not help but notice her. She was one of those women, she walked in a room and she was in charge of it. Long, dark, flowing hair. Absolutely spellbinding. And then she said, "Oh yeah," in her Essex accent. I can't do an Essex accent, I'm very sorry. I would if I could. She was brilliant. We got on like a house on fire, and within a short space of time, she took me under her wing and taught me everything I would ever need to know about supported housing, how it works, how we deal with things like rent and repairs, but also how we liaised with social services, probation officers, and a multitude of other professionals. And in time, she was headhunted and I was offered the job. Me, who would never amount to anything, had responsibility for 17 young people with physical disabilities and the bungalows that they lived in, and for the annual budget that we worked with. It's quite scary in a way. On my first day, I'll never forget my first day. I drove into work, so excited I arrived early, about 7:30. I didn't need to start till 8, but I arrived about 7:30. And I now had the key to the front door. I put the key in, let myself in. I'm sort of, look at me, I'm the manager. I'd even put some manager-like clothes on, which didn't really suit me and I didn't really feel comfortable in them, but you know, I'd not been a manager before. I thought this was what managers had to do. I went in the kitchen, I made a cup of tea like I would normally do. I took my cup of tea and a couple of Janet's biscuits that she always kept in the cupboard. And I went into the manager's office. I sat down at the desk, put my cup of tea there, switched on the computer, and then I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do here? I had no idea, totally overwhelmed. Well, before I knew it, it was 8 o'clock. Janet was coming through the door and stuff just started happening, and I just had to manage it. And I loved it. And I got on really well. And I was manager number 16 in 8 years. I took the scheme from being one that the company saw as problematic and, gosh, why can't we offload it onto some other housing association, to being one that became one of the top performing supported housing units in the area. I started training the staff because training budget was so poor. I thought, well, I'll have to train them, so I started learning myself. I learned to be a trainer, and within 2 years, I was area manager. Another year, I was a training manager, and everything I'd ever imagined was happening for me. And you know what was really great? Housing associations are a bit like local authorities. You know, there isn't a rigid dress code. You can be you, which really suited me, of course. Over time, I realised that the reason I'd gone from entry-level job to entry-level job and nothing had worked out for me was that I was self-sabotaging. Why would I do that? Well, it wasn't meant to happen for me. I wasn't supposed to be successful. I wasn't supposed to amount to anything. But now, I was ready. I was very ready. I wasn't perfect. I was still quite anxious. One of the things my manager, Tim, would say to me every month, he'd write on my supervision notes, Jaqui is going to try and stop apologising so often. So I still wasn't completely there. I was still struggling with confidence. But you know what? It was getting better and better and better. And of course, as an area manager and then as a training manager, I got to travel all over the country to other services, and I got to know lots of staff. And do you know what? We got on really well. And they would compliment me on the training that I was giving, and it all just carried on building me up and building me up. So that was really good. But I want to see that happen for young people today. I want them to get there before the age of 40. I don't want them to be self-sabotaging as many will be doing. And the other thing, of course, is imposter syndrome. I did struggle with that for another 10 years. You know, every time the phone rang, if it was the boss, I'd think he's going to tell me to clear my desk because now he knows I'm a fraud. Have you ever felt like that? I suspect some of you have. So, what can we do about it? Well, there's lots of things, isn't there, that are needed. But the area that I'm focused on is routes to employment. What does that mean? Well, there are lots of different routes to employment. It can include training, work experience, work trials, apprenticeships, extra study. It can include lots of different areas. For me, it's a course. I have a 2-week intensive course for young people. It consists of 12 young people, 10 days of learning, 55 outcomes, 6 months of mentoring, 1 certificate and 1 CV, all adding up to an amazing experience. Week 1 is the Ignition program. If you haven't heard of it, the Ignition program is a personal development program that is aimed at young people. Yeah, and in that program, they'll find out what sort of traveller are they. It's all about going on a journey. What sort of traveller are they? What's their real identity? Who are they? What about luggage? What luggage do they take and what baggage do they leave behind? What are their values? What are their qualities? They'll investigate these and discover where their skills lie. And that's not even all. The second week is work focus. So in the second week, they will, of course they're going to do interview skills, but they're going to interview and be interviewed. They're going to discover what it is that employers are looking for. They're going to consider what their personal impact is. What do people think when they see them? They're going to meet people with their own businesses, spend a half a day with them, asking them any questions they like, find out about self-employment as a real option. And then they'll spend another half day with senior staff from larger businesses to find out more about what they need to do to get a job in these sectors. And then on the last day, we'll have a huge celebration and they'll be told who their mentor is. And the mentors are volunteers who are business owners and senior managers, who are going to give up 1 hour a week of their time to talk to a young person on the phone, on Skype, WhatsApp, whatever the latest social media platform of the day is. Doesn't that sound good? If you want to know more about this amazing experience that you can offer to young people, you just have to contact me. My website is www.beacademy.uk. You can find all the contact details there. Because you know, I can't run this course without your help. So how can this course be financed? Well, if you're a local authority, you can book the course for 12 young people that may be in your care or that you know to be neat. You could sponsor just one young person, maybe a young person you know who needs it, or maybe just a donation that would pay for one young person. If you're a school, again, you can pay for a group to receive the training, or you can contribute towards a few of your pupils coming on the course. There are lots of options. But it's really time, isn't it, to start making things better for young people, giving them more chances, more options, and a better future. Let's do it together. Thank you.